Hey guys, Andrew here again. I'm going to be talking today about The Blue Sword by Robin Mckinley. This was a book that my mom suggested. It's one of her favorite books, and I was a little hesitant. I am not the biggest fan of high adventure fantasy, especially if it's an older book. But this one was actually really interesting, very well written, very good story. And, it's like I would definitely put it in my top 20, if not my top 10. It was one that I greatly enjoyed reading. So the story is that there's a girl named Angharad's crew, known as Harry. She goes by Harry in the books because who wants to be known as Angharad? And basically her father dies, and she is sent to her brother, who is working out in the deserts, to keep peace between their homeland and these mountain men tribes. These hill people, as they are called in the books. And he leaves her with this very respectable, very kind elderly couple who take her in and help take care of her. And meanwhile, there is a war brewing between the hill people and the northerners. And the hill people know they don't have numbers to take out the northerners, so they go to talk to the homelanders, the Harry's people, about possibly fighting together and creating a type of peace. So Korlath, the king of the hill tribes, goes to Harry's adoptive parents' house to barter for peace. Needless to say, everything goes to pot. Korlath walks away in a storm, and as he's leaving, he catches eyes with Harry. And she is immediately filled with this weird sense of dread and, just shocked to her core. And she can't understand why. She just kind of stands there frozen. He gets on his horse and rides away. And one of the interesting things in this is that the hill people have very unique, very special horses that don't use barely use saddles, don't use any, the mouthpieces, any of the reins or anything to control their horses. They do it entirely through words and trust, which is one of the things that makes them unique and interesting. The king, Korlath, has walked away, and he has this special ability. It's this innate power within himself that is passed down through his line, and it tells him what to do. It gives him a rough idea of things that are supposed to happen to get things correctly, to make things. So it's called Keller, and basically it's a magic of the royal blood, and it has some good effects and it has some negative effects. It does have a tendency to cause accidents and random occurrences of bad luck in their enemies, which is really useful. And Korlath keeps seeing Harry in his mind, and something about his power tells him that she is important, that he needs her. So he sneaks into her house, basically walks through the walls using his power, gives her a pill, knocks her out, and puts her on his horse, and they ride away. And she wakes up and is very calm through the whole thing, which is the thing I find really interesting, is that, in typical books like this, a proper female damsel would be freaking out, and Harry's just very calm. She doesn't see it as her being kidnapped. There's not a lot of her having huge remorse about being away from home or not being able to go back. It doesn't feel as much like a kidnapping. There is elements of that, and definitely on Korlath he has a lot of sadness and frustration of having to take this woman, but he knows that it is a requirement. That is something that his power tells him he has to. And as Harry goes through and learns about these hill people and this hill tribe, she starts developing her own version of Keller, and it's very strong and it's very interesting. And she is visited by the redheaded heroine of the hill people called Lady Erin. And Lady Erin is the main character of another book that Mckinley wrote called the hero on the crown. So Blue Sword is a sequel spin-off of that series. I have not read Hero on the Crown, but you don't necessarily need it to read this one. I really like it's an interesting thing because she takes this drink that's supposed to give her visions, and she just has this huge envisionment of the war that's to come, and she sees a woman dressed up like a hill person carrying a sword of blue and leading the troops into battle. And Korlath takes this to mean that it's her, that she is the one. So he has her trained, and she is put in through the trials to become one of his generals, one of his elite men, one of his men. And she passes. She picks up everything super quickly. She is being guided by the spirit of Lady Erin, who helps her along and leads her to become basically his right hand. So the time comes for them to go out to war, and Harry looks at the maps and looks at all the stuff that the king's like, we're going to fight them here. I don't have all the troops I would like, but we'll take them here and we will kill as many of them as we can before we die. And Harry's like, what about this trail over here? It's very narrow. Would be if they go through here, they'll come up around us and they can just slaughter us. There'd be no way to defend against it. To which the king says, I don't need to worry about that. There's a hometown there. If they do come through there, they'll busy themselves killing them, and they won't make it for the battle. Harry disagrees, and she disagrees on this fervently, so she ends up leaving with two of the young swordsmen who join her. And she goes to the army of her homelanders, to the colonel there, who is a friend of hers from when she was visiting earlier, convinces them to join her. So her and a band of around 30 men go off to this pathway and face an army of hundreds. And it's a really cool, really interesting action scene. I don't want to give away the ending, but it's really interesting. It's really well written. My personal thoughts on this book overall is it's really well written. It's very accessible. And that's a key word, because I've tried to read books like this before. I've tried to read Lord of the Rings. I've tried to read other books that are in this style. And this one has flaws in the writing. I'm not going to deny that. But it is not the hardest to pick up. And I had a really good challenge, because if some of you saw this book of when I was reading it and how small this print actually is, it's really hard to keep track of where you are in a paragraph, and it took me a really long time to finish. But I was quite I wasn't begrudging any of the time I was reading this. It is a hard book to start. When you start and it's just the hometown and her explaining what happened to her and what's going on in this small home village, you're just like, I was just yawning the whole through parts of it, and I almost put it down. I almost put down about 20 pages into it. But when they introduce Korlath and he gets started and they do her leaving the town, it really picks up and it becomes really interesting and really fascinating. I loved the hill people in this. I loved how they looked at the world, how they looked at each other, how the system worked there. It was very interesting. It was really interesting to see it from Harry's viewpoint of someone who, while technically is outside of it, feels at home in it, that's one of the real good strengths of the series. Is the main character is great. She's well written. She is not a typical. She is not a damsel in distress in any way. She is very strong, very determined. But she's also a person who is being pushed to be something and do things that she does not necessarily believe she can accomplish. And it's really interesting. It's really cool to see that from that kind of viewpoint. Korlath is an interesting character as teams go and as that kind of story goes. I wish there was a little bit more of him, because when you start out the book, you see it from his perspective, and then her perspective, and then his perspective. But as the book goes on, it gets more entirely from her perspective. So there are certain little things that I wish I could have seen from his perspective, but for the most part, he's well written, he's really interesting, and he's really powerful and respectful, and you can understand why he's not only a king, but why he is a king with trusted, loyal followers. And that's really interesting. One of the things is that the twist ending in the book is very familiar to me. It's a there was a similar ending in the book series that I read called Into the Forge, Into the Fire. I do not recommend that series. That series is horrible. Well, not horrible. It's a cheap Lord of the Rings ripoff. It's almost point for point Lord of the Rings, and it has one of the most annoying things that I hate about fantasy writing. The reason I was a little hesitant to do this is they would do the thing like, we are now entering the Forest of the Forgotten, and then you'll spend 30 pages telling you the history of the Forest of the Forgotten, and then it's like, oh, and then our main characters left. And so nothing happens to the main characters while they're there. We just get a 30-page backstory of this pointless forest. And that was one of the things, like, this book did not do that, and I'm very grateful for that, but it does describe things well enough, and it tells you that there is a history, and that history is deep and interesting and impactful, but it doesn't bore you by delving into it. And this Into the Forge, Into the Fire's ending, the twist ending that's very similar to this one, feels completely left field. You have no idea it's coming. It's just like, oh, there's this species that we've barely mentioned, and now they're going to help us win. There is no species in this one, but they do something similar happens. I'm not going to spoil it any more than that. But it makes sense. They set it up well, and it's really cool, and it's really interesting. And yeah, my biggest complaints about this book, the few that I have, are, again, keeping the story straight. And again, because of the way the book style the version I was reading, that probably was the book's fault, not the story's. For me, I think the biggest problem I have is the very last paragraph. The very ending of the paragraph just kind of stops. And it's not a fully finished thought, it's just kind of a, oh yeah, we were doing this and that, and that's it. And you're like, what? Okay. I'm like, honestly, I wish it had ended 2 paragraphs earlier. It would have been fine. She could have ended this solidly, but she chose to end this on a kind of note. But there are a lot of strengths to this. There's a really good story, really good characters, really well written world. And it is one I highly recommend. If you all get a chance to take a look at it, I do recommend it. It is one, if you are a fan of fantasy, if you are a fan of strong female characters, this is definitely an interesting one to look at. I don't think I have anything else to say on this one. Again, if you guys like these videos, please let me know. I will try to make some more, because I am just about to finish a new book, and I may do one for that. And I give you a little hint of it right here. Okay, so hopefully we'll be able to post that one within a week or so. And happy reading to you all, and I hope to see you all in the bayou real soon.